All right, so today we are uh, going deep into the world of legislative drafting,
A world that most people don't really think about too much,
right?
but that affects our lives every day.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah,
Every law, every regulation that governs us started as like an idea in somebody's head.
absolutely.
And it takes legislative drafters to really hammer out what those ideas mean in the real world.
It's turning the blueprint into the actual building, making
Oh,
sure that
man.
it can stand up.
So for this deep dive, we are looking at some source material from RoleCatcher.
Okay.
They're a career development platform.
Right.
And they have a ton of insights into what it actually takes to become a legislative drafter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really surprised by how much more to it there is than just being good with words or a grammar guru.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like it's so much more than that.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's really a fascinating blend of analytical skills and legal expertise and just this ability to think ahead and anticipate problems.
So when we say they shape our world,
Right.
what do they actually do?
Well, let's imagine for a second
Yeah.
that somebody hands you a policy goal. Like, we need to regulate the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare.
Whoa,
Yeah.
big topic.
Big one, right?
Huge.
And you have to take that and turn it into actual concrete language that can be implemented and make sure that it's clear and concise.
So are they kind of like the architects then of our legal system?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it.
Taking all these complex ideas and turning them into
Well,
like nuts and bolts.
It's like they're building the framework that all
Yeah.
the other pieces can slot into.
And it's not just new laws.
Right.
They're also
Oh.
analyzing existing legislation,
Lots of analysis involved.
looking for things that need to be like updated or clarified.
Oh, absolutely, because the law is constantly evolving.
Okay.
New situations emerge, new technologies.
So is it kind of like renovating a building then to make sure it's still functional?
You've got to keep it up to code.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that it still meets the needs of the people who are using it.
Wow. That's a lot of pressure
It is.
to make sure that the things that they're doing are going to last.
Right, and to anticipate how things might change in the future
Yeah.
and how your law might be interpreted in 10, 20, 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So they need to consider different interpretations, potential loopholes, how technology might impact the application of the law down the line.
Oh, wow.
It's high-stakes linguistic chess.
Linguistic chess. That's a really good way to put it.
Right.
And this is where it gets really interesting because one of the biggest challenges,
Oh,
according to RoleCatcher for legislative drafters, is making sure that the language that they use is accessible to everyone.
it can't just be for lawyers and legal experts.
Right, because we need to understand it too.
Exactly, because ultimately the law applies to everyone.
Oh,
It's
God.
not just for a select few. So they act as this bridge between this very technical world
Right.
and the everyday citizen who needs to understand how it applies to their life.
Right. Yeah.
Well-
because if you can't understand it, how are you supposed to follow it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Imagine trying to explain something like intellectual property rights
Yep.
in the age of digital streaming
Okay.
to someone who still primarily listens to vinyl records.
Ooh.
Right, good luck.
Yeah, that's
That's a tough one.
a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah. You've got algorithms
Cool.
and digital rights management and
It's a lot.
international copyright laws.
It's a minefield.
It's a minefield, right? And you
Yeah.
have to explain it in a way that
Yeah.
makes sense to somebody who's like, what's an algorithm?
It's like, how do
Oh.
we even begin to?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So like they're writing the instruction manual for the legal system
Yeah.
and making it user-friendly for everyone.
I like that.
Yeah.
The instruction manual.
Okay.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
But there's another layer of complexity here
Right.
that RoleCatcher talks about. And it's this idea of future-proofing the law.
Okay. How do you even begin to future-proof a law?
Right, because the law...
Because the world changes so much.
Exactly. So like one example they talked about was the drafting of some of the early legislation around automobiles.
Oh, wow.
Way back when.
Yeah.
And obviously back then,
They weren't thinking about self-driving cars.
no, they
Uh-huh.
weren't thinking about,
Sorry.
electric vehicles or anything like that.
Right.
But they still had to think ahead.
Okay, so instead of saying like,
Right.
this law applies to the Model T,
Right.
they had to think more broadly.
They had to think about the concept of a motor vehicle
Okay.
and the impact that that could have on society and how the law could adapt over time to future innovations.
So what kind of things did they have to write?
Well, they had to create a framework
Okay.
that would encompass all these potential future developments.
Okay.
So that laid the groundwork
Huh.
for all of the regulations we have today about everything from seatbelt laws to emission standards.
Wow, that's incredible.
It all goes back to those early drafters.
It's like they were playing 4D chess with the future of transportation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that same kind of forward thinking is what's needed today with technology changing so rapidly.
Well, and speaking of technology,
Right.
RoleCatcher talks about how it's changing legislative drafting.
Yeah.
And it's not just like having a computer.
No, it's not just word processing.
Right.
We're talking about powerful search engines,
Okay.
AI-powered legal databases,
Great.
and even the potential for AI to help with the drafting process.
Okay, now we're getting into some really futuristic stuff here.
It is very futuristic, but
Yeah.
it's important to remember that technology is a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
Yep.
So the key is to use it responsibly
Okay.
and ethically.
So it's not about replacing the legislative drafters with robots.
No, it's about empowering them,
Okay.
giving them the tools they need
To be more
to
efficient.
be more effective,
Okay.
more efficient.
So, like, what could we imagine if we gave them all the tools that they could possibly want?
Well, imagine if AI could analyze mountains of data,
Okay.
identify potential loopholes and problems,
Okay.
maybe even translate that complex legal language into plain English.
Wow, that would be amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
Make it more accessible to the public.
So it frees them up to really focus on strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the nuances.
The big picture stuff.
The big picture thinking, exactly.
Yeah.
And this kind of ties into another thing that RoleCatcher mentions,
Okay.
which is that there's actually a lot of room for career progression within legislative drafting.
Oh, okay. So it's not just like a one-size-fits-all.
No. There's lots of different ways you can specialize and grow in this field.
So you could become like a senior drafter?
You could become a senior drafter. You could specialize
Okay.
in a particular area of law, like environmental law.
Environmental law, intellectual property law.
Okay.
You could even go into a more managerial or leadership role
Oh, wow.
where you're mentoring junior drafters
Okay.
or you're advising government agencies.
So it sounds like you really have an impact.
You really do.
You're shaping
That's it.
laws that govern us,
Yeah.
and you're also shaping the next generation of legal minds.
Wow.
So it's a very impactful career path.
Yeah. And it sounds like it takes a really unique combination of skills, too.
It does. It requires analytical thinking,
Right.
attention to detail,
Mm-hmm.
deep understanding of the law, and the ability to communicate these very complex ideas clearly
Good for sure.
and concisely.
Yeah, because you got to make sure everyone understands it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like they say the pen is mightier than the sword,
That's right.
but in this case, it's the keyboard that's crafting the future.
The keyboard is mightier.
Yeah.
Well said.
Okay.
And speaking of crafting the future,
Right.
let's delve into one of the most fascinating aspects of this field.
Okay.
Hmm.
What is that most fascinating aspect?
I think it's how legislative drafting impacts our everyday lives in ways that most people don't even realize.
Okay. How so?
Well, think about it. Every time you stream a song,
Right.
start a new business,
Mm-hmm.
even just drive a car, you're interacting with laws and regulations
Yeah.
that were carefully crafted by legislative drafters.
It's like the code that runs in the background that you don't even see.
Exactly. They're like the unseen architects of our society,
Yeah.
building those legal frameworks that shape our interactions and our freedoms and our responsibilities as citizens.
And RoleCatcher really stresses that sense of responsibility.
They do. They
Yeah.
emphasize that legislative drafters don't operate in a vacuum.
Right?
They're constantly working within this complex web of political considerations and
It's-
societal values and evolving technologies.
So it's like a balancing act.
It is. It's
Yeah.
like this constantly shifting scale,
Mhm.
trying to create laws that are both fair and effective
Mhm.
in a world that's changing so rapidly.
Right, because what might have worked 20 years ago
Exactly.
doesn't necessarily work today.
And that's where I think that artistry of legislative drafting really comes in. It's not just about knowing the law inside and out.
Okay.
It's also about understanding the people
Okay.
the law is meant to serve
Right.
and the world in which that law will be applied.
Okay, so it's finding that sweet spot then
Yes.
between the way it's written
Yeah.
and the way it's actually going to be used.
Finding that balance between precision and practicality.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that leads us to a really interesting question
Okay.
that RoleCatcher poses.
What is that?
What does the future hold for legislative drafters in this age of increasing technological advancement?
Well, we've already talked about AI a little bit.
Right?
Are there other trends that are coming out?
Yeah, one area that's particularly interesting is international law,
Oh,
international cooperation.
that makes sense because we're not isolated anymore.
Exactly. In a globalized world
Yeah.
with issues like climate change and cybersecurity.
Yeah, those are global problems.
They're global problems.
Ugh.
So we need legal frameworks that can cross borders.
So do legislative drafters have to become like experts in international law as well then?
Well, they need to be very familiar with it.
Okay.
They need to understand international treaties
Okay.
and conventions and legal principles.
So they're multilingual but in law.
Exactly. They're fluent in different legal systems
Okay, wow.
and able to bridge those gaps
That was really cool.
and draft legislation that can actually work across different cultures and jurisdictions.
Wow, the ripple effect then is huge.
It is. It's massive.
Okay.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive here
Okay.
into this world,
Yeah.
I think the important thing to take away is just how crucial legislative drafters are to a functioning society.
Okay.
They may not be in the spotlight,
Yeah.
but they're the ones working behind the scenes.
They're the ones making sure everything works.
Exactly. Making sure those laws are clear
Okay.
and fair
Hmm.
and adaptable
Yeah.
to the challenges of an ever-changing world.
Well said. I like that.
Yeah.
So next time we encounter a really well-written piece of legislation,
Yes.
we'll take a moment to really think about
Appreciate
work that went into it.
the craftsmanship that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it really is a craft.
It is.
It's more than just writing.
Absolutely.
It's really fascinating.
It is.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious.